Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through some Week 13 IDP waiver wire pickups.
Hike!
All right, Joe. So the first guy we're going to be talking about is linebacker Malcom Rodriguez, or Rodrigo, as they like to call him, as he now is taking over for the Detroit Lions linebacker crew because Alex Anzalone was put on injured reserve. Had an okay game, nothing crazy, 7 solo tackles, 1 assisted tackle. But I think the reason why you and I are putting him on here, he's only rostered in 17% of leagues, and he played a total of 89% of the snaps. So he's getting more and more of the snaps. It's going to be him and Jack Campbell. But I think he's worth an ad, Joe. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think he's worth an ad, for the increase in playing time, as you mentioned, with Anzalone being injured. He gets a chance to play on Thanksgiving here against the Bears, and the Lions are trying to get their first win on Thanksgiving. They've lost 7 straight Thanksgiving games.
Are they really?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's surprising considering how good they've been recently. I think they might change the tide. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think they definitely could, but I mean, I thought they would have beat the Packers last year at home, but they didn't. So if they're not too careful with the Bears, something could happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, I would think this is the type of player who has shown, I believe, showed flashes, I think, in his rookie year. And then he really has kind of been an afterthought ever since. I would say 2 to 5%. FAAB to get him. I think when it comes to linebackers, especially later in the year, you start to see some villains come in. We talk about Agent Jack Sanborn in the past. Some other linebackers we've talked about have kind of come out of the woodwork. I think he's one of those other guys that he'd be on my radar.
Yeah, I think the 2 to 5% is fair. I mean, we're not saying go out, spend a ton of FAAB to go get this guy, but I do think he's a value add. Could help your team in a pinch here.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So next player we're going to be talking about here is defensive tackle Leonard Williams. Now, he is a household name. You should know him, but in defensive tackle required leagues, this guy should be rostered, only rostered in 34% of leagues. Had a fantastic game against the Arizona Cardinals, 2.5 sacks, 3 assisted tackles, 3 solos, 3 tackles for loss, 4 QB hits, and a pass deflection. His best game of the year. Has kind of been up and down, but he's a guy who has proven to be good. I think he's well worth rostering. What say you, Joe?
Yeah, I was actually surprised at how low his roster percentage was. But you mentioned it. I mean, he coming off of a great game that he had, just really was really showed his strength and power, just constantly getting into the backfield there. Really making an impact in the game. And I like some of his upcoming matchups to where, he's the type of guy that can get you those sacks, which is huge from the interior defensive tackle position. So I think he could kind of ride this last week and carry it on into future weeks and have some better production.
Well, I think the thing too is he's the primary defensive tackle. I know they drafted Byron Murphy, out of Texas in the first round. He's been rotating in. They also have Jerron Reed, the veteran, who's kind of plays more nose for them. He's kind of a bigger bodied guy. So Leonard Williams is the pass rushing D tackle you want, and he's the one who leads the team in snaps. So I think if he's still out there in your league and you have to play a defensive tackle, I think it makes a lot of sense. All right, so the next player we're going to be talking about here is one of your guys who you like, Joe, and you told me that I should like this guy. He was the number one defensive rookie on the board last year. That's going to be defensive end Laiatu Latu of the Indianapolis Colts. He's starting to heat up, Joe. Has had a sack in the past 2 weeks against the Lions. He had a sack, 2 assisted tackles, 2 solos, a tackle for loss, 2 QB hits, and a forced fumble. Like I said, back-to-back sacks, starting to heat up a little bit. He is rostered in 52% of leagues, which is pretty high, but that could be based on dynasty as well. So definitely would be worth looking out to see if you could get this guy. Even a guy, I think we talked about Kwity Paye recently. Kwity Paye also on that line. Just the Colts defensive line in general is performing at a stronger clip. What say you about Laiatu Latu? I'm assuming you're going to say great things.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Uh, you weren't as enthused about Latu, but he was my guy that I trusted the most and liked him. And you mentioned the back-to-back sack games that he's got, and he's got the New England Patriots this week, and I think the sack streak could definitely continue for him. Patriots offensive line is absolutely terrible. Saw Chop Robinson this past week take advantage of it against Drake May. Think Latu could do similar things to what Chop Robinson was able to accomplish this past week.
One thing that surprises me, he actually is out. He outsnapped only by a few snaps, but he actually outsnapped Kwity Paye. Latu did. The number one edge rusher who had the most snaps just by a little bit was Deo Odengbo. So I think it's really the three of those guys who are kind of rotating. So I wouldn't put a ton on them, but when you start seeing a couple sacks, is it becoming a trend? That's what I ask myself. And if he has another sack, he might be too late. So it might be time to go get him.
Yeah, well, if he does have another sack, you might be spared because they do have a Week 14 bye.
That's
so
true.
People aren't going to be necessarily rushing to pick him up for the Week 14. But maybe if they make the playoffs, and he gets that third sack, they'll pick him up after this bye week.
Next player we're going to be talking about is another edge rusher, and that's going to be defensive end Leonard Floyd, guy who's been relevant over these past 2 years. He also has been on a burner these past 2 weeks at the Packers. He had 2 sacks, 4 solo tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 QB hits. The game prior, he had 1.5 sacks, which is even more impressive. He's been able to do it without Nick Bosa. And that in general, the San Francisco 49ers defense has not been what we are accustomed to seeing from them. What are your thoughts on Leonard Floyd here, Joe?
Yeah, you mentioned it. It takes a couple of games to possibly become a trend, and that's what we've seen. I mean, 3.5 sacks the past 2 games, and to your point, I mean, that was without Nick Bosa, which oddly enough, you'd think that him being able to play opposite of Bosa would help him, but been productive the past 2 weeks without him. I'm not expecting huge things against the Buffalo Bills this week, though. Josh Allen, he's a tough guy to rush. He's a tough guy to, you don't want to fully commit. So he might not do that well, week 13. But I think if you go ahead and pick him up now, you're going to want him for against the Bears week 14.
Oh,
the Rams can't block anybody right now in week 15. And then against Tua week 16 as well, another good matchup. And then, Detroit Lions, surprisingly enough, I was really surprised that the Colts defense was able to attack them as well as they did. Who knows? Maybe they can get something done against Detroit too if the 49ers are just play with that same intensity that the Colts did.
Didn't Taylor Decker get banged up in that game? I don't know if it's going to be long term.
He did, and honestly, it was a little surprising. Sewell didn't look full as dominant as he usually does either.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's so funny as you were listing the names out of the teams he's playing. I'm like, wow, he's going on his homecoming tour because Floyd's going to be playing. He's playing against the Bills. He's playing against the Bears, and he's playing against the Rams. He's played for all those teams, so he's on a little homecoming stretch here. So who knows if you believe in rivalry games? Although that's kind of tough. I mean, he's playing. Maybe the one he'd probably feel the most strong about was the Bears because, he was a former first-round pick, and he really turned it on after he left the Bears, in my opinion. I mean, near towards the end of the Bears' career, he did well, but neither here or there. But I thought it was interesting as you were kind of rallying out the teams.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you believe in that sort of thing, the revenge tour is on for Leonard Floyd.
It really is. So the last player we're going to be talking about here is linebacker Kenneth Murray of the Tennessee Titans. Had a really good game against the Houston Texans. Had an interception, 6 solo tackles, 2 tackles for loss, an assisted tackle, a QB hit, and 2 pass deflections. The interesting thing about him is Gibbons. He is out. He's on IR. And he was Jack Gibbons, and he was doing really well for the Titans. Then you started seeing Jerome Baker get some playing time. But now it seems like Kenneth Murray is now starting to take over. Has kind of had a lackluster year. But these past 2 weeks, he's done quite well. The thing is with him, though, I don't feel like he has a huge tackle floor. And that's what kind of concerns me about him. But I would say he's definitely worth an ad. What say you, Joe?
Yeah, I think he's worth an ad. I mean, just the fact that he's played, 5 straight games with 100% of the snaps. I mean, obviously, these past 2 without Gibbons out there has been the most fruitful for him. Against Minnesota, he was able to get 10 10 tackles. It's his only double-digit tackle game to your mention with the tackle floor. But then, against Minnesota as well, he was able to get that sack, and then past week he was able to get the interception off of CJ Stroud. So if he can keep making those big plays and getting those turnover-worthy plays, he's going to help you, stay up into the 20 to 30-point range like he has the last 2 weeks.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few players that you should go check your waiver wire and see if you can't add them. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.